Okay, now I hate to make a nuisance of myself, but I'm back because I was digging around and I wasn't able to find it at my local library, but I did find the ebook of Marion Crawford, Crawfie, the governess of Margaret and Elizabeth. I found her book from 1950. I found the ebook for $5, okay? So, it's very short. It's like 256 pages, but that's like an ebook, so I think it's even shorter than that. Because, when you're reading an ebook, it's like this big. Well, because I read it on my phone. I don't have a reader anymore, but okay, so we're going to start it just as like a little extra, a little aside. Now, when I was looking through the back of Kitty Kelly's book, so I told you that in her foreword, she has, names upon names upon names of people that she spoke to. Like when I'm telling you, she has pages. Okay. So this is a page of names. Names. Wild. And then in the back, the afterword, okay, she has a huge afterword, and then, I shouldn't say huge, but substantial. Her chapter notes are all this. So when we're done, we'll go through, because she has like little bits of correspondence that she received from like Edwina Mountbatten and things like that. Like, it's crazy. So we'll make sure that we go through and do that. Okay, anyway, you might have to put me on mute, because you're probably getting too many alerts from me, and I apologize. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we will hold on. We are going to start that just as a fun little aside. And I think it's interesting because the little bit that I peeked at, it shows how accurate Kitty Kelly is. And you know what? If you have watched The Crown, it seems like almost verbatim this book. Which obviously this came out first. This came out in 98, I believe. Okay, so the book is called The Little Princesses, The Story of the Queen's Childhood by Her Nanny by Marion Crawford. And it's introduced by Jenny Bond, who apparently is a journalist for the BBC. Okay, so we're going to start with the foreword. I'm not sure if we'll do beyond that right now because I've slammed you with so much content today, and I apologize. I can't get my necklace. Where did it go? Ugh, whatever. Okay, so the foreword by Jenny Bond. Jenny Bond? Yes. During more than a decade as royal correspondent for the BBC, I have waged many a battle with Buckingham Palace over access to information. I have berated and badgered a succession of press secretaries demanding answers to my questions. Slowly and grudgingly, the palace doors have opened enough to allow a chink of light inside. The process has been given the odd, unexpected boost by one or two members of the royal family who have volunteered to go public with astonishing personal revelations. There remains, however, a deep skepticism within the palace walls about the media and their function in reporting on royalty. Greater still is the horror with which any member of staff who spills the beans is viewed. Patrick Jephson, who gave his account of life as private secretary to the Princess of Wales, was seen as a traitor to her memory. Wendy Barry, a former housekeeper at Highgrove, was forced to flee to Canada when she published a book that was described to me by someone in the household as the most accurate record of the final years of the Wales' marriage, and that's the one that Cher Denise has read. So check it out. But the pioneer of the royal kiss and tell was undoubtedly Marion Crawford, governess and confidant of Lilibet, the young girl who would one day become queen, and of her sister Margaret. The Little Princesses is a charming, hopelessly romantic chronicle of Crawfie's life during 16 years at the heart of the royal family. It is also a valuable piece of social history, detailing every aspect of Elizabeth and Margaret's childhood through the crucial years of the abdication and the war, as well as Lilibet's courtship and marriage. It is harmless in the extreme. Among the most explosive revelations is the fact that in the schoolroom the two princesses behaved like entirely normal and healthy little girls. And she quotes, "Neither was above taking a whack at her adversary, if roused, and Lilibet was quick with her left hook." But the publication of the book led Queen Elizabeth, later Queen Mother, to conclude that Crawfie had gone off her head. She was cast adrift as if she had committed treason, and neither the Queen nor the two princesses ever spoke to her again. Her only crime had been to paint an affectionate and loyal portrait of a family to whom she had devoted a large part of her life, at considerable personal cost. But it was a crime for which she would never be forgiven. Marion Crawford's own childhood had been a far cry from the world of palaces and castles that was to become so familiar. Born in a cottage near Kilmarnock in 1909, her father died when she was 1 year old. Her mother then remarried. The family moved to Dunfermline, where Marion was educated. She always felt she had a vocation to teach, and imagined she would end up helping some of the poor and undernourished children she met during her training in Edinburgh. But fate intervened. No sooner was she qualified than a network of acquaintances led her to the Duchess of York and a plum job in the royal household. It was a bold step by the Duke and Duchess to employ someone as untested as Marion Crawford. Not only was she inexperienced as a governess, she was also very young. At just 24, she was 9 years the Duchess's junior. But this was part of her appeal. The Duke had unhappy memories of his elderly tutors and was determined that his girl should have someone with more energy. Crawfie, as she was soon christened by her charges, found that her job description was fairly nebulous. Apart from running around with them, her chief instruction appears to have come from the children's grandfather, King George V, who appealed to her to teach Margaret and Lilibet to write a decent hand. "That's all I'll ask you. Not one of my children can write properly." Those who knew her say Crawfie was a shy Scots girl, always extremely pleasant without being particularly interesting. No one questions her devotion to her two young charges, and the princesses were equally devoted to her. Here, at last, was someone willing to join in their games. The book paints an intimate portrait of life in the nursery. And it quotes, "One of Lilibet's favorite games that went on for years was to harness me with a pair of red reins that had bells on them, and we would go delivering groceries." It seems unsurprising that Lilibet, who in adult life is viewed as pretty buttoned up, was an extremely tidy child. Crawfie was struck by the immaculate condition of her 30 toy horses, each with its own saddle and bridle carefully polished by the girls themselves. At times the tidiness appeared to border on obsession, with Lilibet getting out of bed several times a night to check that her shoes were neatly lined up. It is with some relief that we learn that this serious child could have moments of rebellion, as she did during a desperately boring French lesson when she seized a silver inkpot and turned it upside down on her head, a predicament from which Crawfie had to rescue both the princess and her French teacher. Margaret, meanwhile, is portrayed as willful and headstrong, spoiled by her parents but with a quick, bright mind. You get the impression that she was quite a handful for Crawfie, but that her sometimes outrageous behavior was refreshing in the confined world in which they all lived. "There are so many things Margaret could have done with brilliance and distinction," she writes. According to Crawfie, Lilibet was protective, even motherly, towards her younger sister. In her own intuitive fashion, I think she saw ahead how later on Margaret was bound to be misrepresented and misunderstood. She did not, however, foresee that her own governess would become the palace ogre who sold the family secrets. Crawfie certainly gave no hint that she was intending to sell her story. Indeed, there is a piquant irony in the book as she recounts Lilibet's unhappiness about the publicity surrounding her engagement to Philip. The heart of a princess is shy, and as easily hurt as any other young girl's heart, writes Crawfie. In time, royalty grow accustomed and hardened to this prying into their private lives and make little of it, but not at 19, not in love, deeply and passionately, for the first time. She concludes that royalty earn every penny that they get for their loss of privacy. So why, then, did Marion Crawford, so well liked in royal circles, trusted by her employers and adored by the princesses, decide to compromise that privacy, however sycophantically? I always say sycophantically. Several theories have been put forward, but the truth may never be known. One school of thought argues that Crawfie was seeking revenge because she was only made a commander of the Royal Victorian Order when she left the royal household instead of the grander dame commander. There is, though, nothing that smacks of vengeance in this sympathetic and uncritical book. Another theory, unearthed in a television documentary 50 years after The Little Princesses was published, is more Machiavellian. It claims that Crawfie was the scapegoat for a botched PR campaign hatched by the Foreign Office and Queen Elizabeth, now Queen Mother, designed to improve the royal family's standing in the United States. According to this theory, the view was taken that a series of well-sourced articles in a top American magazine would do the royal family a power of good. Crawfie was allegedly told she could cooperate as long as her name wasn't mentioned, but she failed to read the small print of the contract which allowed her to be named as the author. Some of Crawfie's surviving contemporaries believe that there may indeed have been a misunderstanding that led her to believe she had clearance from Queen Elizabeth to help with some articles. But they also hold Crawfie's husband, George Boothleigh, largely responsible for her downfall. Given the demands of her job, it is astonishing that she found the time to meet and be wooed by anyone. The royal family are hard taskmasters and expect their servants to give them undivided attention and loyalty. When she was 30, however, Crawfie had to make a tough choice between her job and marriage. Her dedication to her employers was such that she didn't even mention her dilemma. Instead, she told George Boothleigh, an Aberdeen bank manager, that he would have to wait because war was looming and she would be needed more than ever at the palace. It was only when Princess Elizabeth was on the brink of marriage, with Margaret almost 18 and Crawfie herself 38, that she broached the subject with the Queen. The response was both sympathetic, acknowledging the sacrifice she had made, and selfish, as Crawfie recalls in her book. "Does this mean you are going to leave us?" Queen Elizabeth, asked me. "You must see, Crawfie, that it would not be at all convenient just now. A change at this stage for Margaret is not at all desirable." And so Crawfie carried on her job for a couple more years, even after she was married, and with her husband still in Scotland. It seems reasonable to accept that George felt some resentment about this, and had few qualms about encouraging his wife to cash in on the knowledge she had acquired during her long tenure at the heart of the royal family. Her account of life as a royal governess was first serialized in magazines in the States, but when the rights were bought by Woman's Own, her story became a front-page sensation on both sides of the Atlantic. The Little Princesses followed shortly afterwards, netting Crawfie and George a total of more than £75,000, an immense sum in those days. The royal family instantly eliminated her from their lives. According to friends, the princesses were desperately hurt and disappointed that someone so close to them had betrayed their trust. The king and queen were furious and had no hesitation in ostracizing her forever. Crawfie retreated to Scotland, from where she began a new career as a journalist, with a column in Woman's Own. In fact, there is some evidence that it was written for her, but the articles carried her name, along with news of royal and society events. Alarmingly, they all had to be written 6 weeks in advance because of the publishing deadlines for color print. Eventually, the inevitable happened. In 1955, writing in the 16 June edition of the magazine, Crawfie gave a gushing description of the trooping the color ceremony and went on to say how radiant the Queen had looked at Ascot. Unfortunately for her, neither of these events had taken place because of a rail strike. Her humiliation was complete, and she was ridiculed in the papers. When her husband died in 1977, Crawfie became more of a recluse. From her house on the road from Aberdeen to Balmoral, she could see the royal cars passing as the family came and went for their holidays. Not once did they call in to see her. Crawfie became lonely and depressed. She attempted suicide but was found by a neighbor. Often she would look through her most treasured possession, her box of mementos of her life with the royal family, letters written to her by Queen Elizabeth during her tour of Canada in 1936, paintings and poems done for her by Lilibet and Margaret, photographs of the girls in the nursery. She could have sold them for a fortune. Instead, she left them to Lilibet in her will. When she died in 1988, the box of memories was taken into the Royal Archive. I mistakenly said 1998. My bad. It's 1988. When I was doing the other reading. There is a consensus in royal circles that Crawfie was badly treated by her former employers. Most believe that her punishment outweighed her sin, and that Queen Elizabeth and her daughters should have been magnanimous enough to forgive her. It must have been bewildering for the aging governess to watch the shift in palace policy while she remained exiled. What must she have thought when in 1969 Lilibet herself, with her husband and children, starred in a television documentary called The Royal Family? How insignificant her own revelations must have seemed as viewers were taken inside the palace to share the family's life. The Queen's decision to allow cameras to follow her so closely is now seen as the start of a slippery slope that eventually led to Prince Charles admitting adultery on television and the Princess of Wales opening her heart to Panorama. How innocent, by comparison, does Crawfie's rose-tinted look at royal life now seem? Much has changed in the half-century since the book was written. The royal family is treated with less deference, partly because it has made it abundantly obvious that it is made up of fallible, vulnerable human beings just like the rest of us. They quarrel and have affairs. They divorce and remarry. Some are confused about their role. Others are trying to live ordinary lives outside the royal circle. In the age of the telephoto lens, their privacy has been eroded. If Crawfie thought the young princess's right to a private life was compromised 50 years ago, how shocked would she have been by the daily newspaper revelations of recent decades accompanied by pictures of a topless duchess, a princess working out in the gym, or leaked intimate phone conversations between royal lovers. Looking back, there is so much more that Marion Crawford could have said, so many secrets she might have betrayed. If this is disloyalty, then it is a very caring and docile disloyalty. Whatever her reasons for writing The Little Princesses, Crawfie produced an important social document, taking us behind the palace walls to enjoy a unique insight into the isolated childhood of the future queen and her sister. Well, this sounds interesting. Oh my goodness. Let's read the first chapter. Oh, go on then. Let's do it. Okay. Like I said, you might have to mute me because I don't want to be blowing up your... You know what I'm trying to say. All right. Chapter 1. I mean, I hope you don't mute me. I hope you like me enough. Chapter 1. I join the household. Let me make sure I have enough battery on my phone. All right. I had always wanted to teach, but I had certainly never intended to become a governess. I was born on 5 June 1909 in the same house where my mother and her father before her had been born, Woodside Cottage near Kilmarnock in Ayrshire. My father died when I was a year old, and 5 years later, when I was 6, my mother remarried, and we came to live at Dunfermline. I studied at the Moray House Training College in Edinburgh, and my training had taken me into the poorer parts of the city. Here I saw a great deal of poverty, and had to do with children who were not very bright because they were undernourished. I was at that time very young, and I became fired with a crusading spirit. I wanted to do something about the misery and unhappiness I saw all round me. I wanted desperately to help. I always had a great sense of vocation, and the feeling I had a job to do in life, and I had quite made up my mind that this was what my job was to be. Something else, however, was coming my way. I had finished my exams and gone home to rest. Dunfermline was a small country town built on hills. Up to the First World War... Are you okay? It's the rabbit. Up to the First World War, it was the center of the linen industry. Both the Queen, when she married, and Princess Elizabeth were given large chests of linen from Dunfermline. Dunfermline, that's a hard name for me to say. It has a famous old abbey where the body of Robert the Bruce is buried, and a lovely palace now in ruins, which was the home of the early kings of Scotland. Once it was the capital of Scotland. Charles I was born there, and the bed in which he was born is now part of a mantelpiece in nearby Broomhall, the home of the Earl and Countess of Elgin. Andrew Carnegie was also born in Dunfermline, in a small, humble cottage which remains quite untouched. Broomhall is a square Georgian house, to the south, looking on to the Forth. To the north one can see the lovely range of the Ochil Hills. Is that how you pronounce it? Guys, I'm ignorant, okay? It has a very large front hall, and round it are placed some of the Elgin marbles. It was old Lord Elgin who brought these over from Greece. As the family is directly descended from Robert the Bruce, his sword and helmet also hang in the hall. Both the helmet and sword are enormous, as he was an outsized man. One morning, I had a letter from Lady Elgin, who knew I had finished my training and had heard I was home on long leave, asking me if I would take her son, Andrew, Lord Bruce, in history. He was a charming little boy of 7, whom I already knew, and as I had nothing very definite to do when I wasn't studying myself, I took this on. What influenced me greatly was that I loved walking, and this post was within walking distance of my home, about 3 miles through shady woods and paths among the farms belonging to Lord Elgin, with occasional glimpses of the Forth through the trees. As I sat writing the letter accepting Lady Elgin's offer, I little dreamed that here was one of those turning points in life that we never do recognize when they first come along. The Elgins were a charming family, very friendly and simple. Soon the 3 other Elgin children joined us, Lady Martha, Lady Jean, and the Honourable Jamie. Presently, I was running a small class at Broomhall, teaching other subjects besides history to 4 very nice children, and enjoying it thoroughly. But I still thought of it as a temporary post, to tide me over until I could take up my real-life work. The Elgins breakfasted early, about 8 o'clock. I used to approach the French windows leading into the schoolroom, to the strains of hymns and the tail end of family prayers, and I would wait in the garden tactfully until these were finished. The children used to peep through their fingers during their devotions to watch for my coming. Friends and relations were always dropping in and would join us for elevensies. The grown-ups had coffee and the children a large glass of lemonade, rock cakes, and jam, while the domestic staff and garden workers would retire at the same time to still room and stable for bread and cheese and cake of their own. Oh, that sounds heavenly. I'm telling you, there's not much in this world as good as bread and cheese. Just saying. Most large country houses have a still room. It is the housekeeper's domain, where all jams are made and stored, all fruit bottled, and light meals that need no cooking, like elevensies and afternoon tea, and after-dinner coffee, and so on, are prepared. It is really an extra pantry and storeroom. The linen is mended there, and peaches and fruit are stored. It probably comes from the old days when ales were brewed and homemade wines made. Lady Rose Leveson Gower came about this time to Rosyth, with her husband, the Admiral, who was stationed there. Rosyth is on the banks of the Forth, not far from Broomhall. I was asked if I would take their little girl, Mary, who was rather delicate, for a short session every day. So now, in the good weather, which is not so infrequent in Scotland as some people suppose, I had a really fine day's walking. I would do the 3 miles to Admiralty House from Broomhall, when I had finished my class there. Then, when the day's work was over, I would walk home again. It seemed to me that this was a pleasant interlude, a temporary arrangement to fill in the time between one course of study and the next. I intended, as soon as my present pupils were ready for school, to return to my first love, which was child psychology. I spent my evenings reading and studying for this very happily. I was 22. At 22, one has the illusion of there being lots of time. Meanwhile, fate was marching up on me in the way fate has. There came one lovely morning when I walked as usual through the gardens of Admiralty House for my session with Mary. The gardens were very charming. Terraces ran down to the River Forth, overlooking a bay called St. Margaret's Hope, after Margaret, sister of Edgar Atheling, the Saxon king. She married Malcolm Canmore, King of Scotland. The chroniclers say she was learned and pious, and a keen politician. She did a lot to bring English ways and customs up to Scotland, and it was here she's supposed to have landed when she came up north. I always took this part of my walk slowly. Lady Rose told me that her sister, the Duchess of York, was coming to see her with the Duke, and that she wanted me to meet them. There were always visitors coming and going, and we were seldom alone for our elevensies. As I crossed the lawn, I remember there came over me an eerie feeling that someone was watching me. It made me look up toward the house. Then I saw there was a face at the window. And for the first time, I met that long, cool stare I was later to come to know so well. Lady Rose's sister, the pretty little Duchess of York, and her young husband, the Duke, were the visitors. I was introduced to them as usual, and we all ate our buns and drank our coffee before Mary and I went off to work. I was quite enchanted, as people always were, by the little Duchess. She was petite, as her daughter Margaret is today. She had the nicest, easiest, most friendly of manners, and a merry laugh. It was impossible to feel shy in her presence. She was beautifully dressed in blue. There was nothing alarmingly fashionable about her. Her hair was done in a way that suited her admirably, with a little fringe on her forehead. She sat on the window ledge. The blue of her dress, I remember, exactly matched the sky behind her that morning and the blue of her eyes. I particularly noticed her lovely string of pearls. She did not wear earrings then. Her hands and feet were tidy. My whole impression was of someone small and quite perfect. The Duke was extraordinarily handsome, but I recall thinking he did not look very strong. He was slight and looked like a boy of 18, though he was considerably older than I. He had a diffident manner and a slight impediment in his speech that was not so much of a stutter in the ordinary sense as a slight nervous constriction of the throat, I thought. It was obvious that they were devoted to each other and very much in love, and I remember thinking they looked just as a Duke and Duchess ought to look, but often don't. No word of any kind was said, or any hint given me of what was coming. 2 weeks later, Lady Rose told me that the Duke and Duchess had talked the matter over and had decided to ask me to undertake the education of their daughters, Princess Elizabeth and Margaret Rose, then aged 5 and 2. They fully realized, Lady Rose said, that there might be some opposition to this arrangement in certain quarters because of my youth, but both the Duke and Duchess were anxious that the little girls should have someone with them young enough to enjoy playing games and running about with them. The Duke, I gathered, had throughout his own childhood been hampered by somewhat immobile pastors and masters. He wanted someone energetic with his children and had been impressed by the amount of walking I did. I told Lady Rose that if I accepted the post, it would mean that I would not be able to go on with what I intended to be my life's work, child psychology, but that it was a great honor, and I should like some time to consider the matter. In 2 weeks' time, I wrote to the Duchess, saying how honored I was to have been asked to undertake the education of the princesses, and I suggested that I should take up the work for a trial period, during which I would be able to determine whether it would be easy for me to become reconciled to the idea of leaving Scotland and my intended career, and living permanently with other people. The Duchess wrote me a charming, friendly little letter. Why not come for a month and see how you like us and how we like you? That seemed a sensible arrangement. It was fixed that I would go to them at Royal Lodge, Windsor, just before Easter. I remember feeling distinctly apprehensive on the long journey south from Scotland. I had led the quiet open-air life of a Scottish girl. I knew nothing whatever about court etiquette. I was a little scared, doubtful whether I was doing the right thing. All the children I had had to do with at the Elgins and the Levison Gowers had been pleasant and amiable, and easy to deal with. It was a couple of very spoiled and difficult little people I somehow visualized as I traveled south, for already the papers had produced odd stories about these royal children. I was more than convinced that my month's trial would stop at the end of the month, and that I should soon be home again. From the train, I had my first glimpse of Windsor Castle. I saw it first in the gathering shadows of a spring twilight. It looms up suddenly, topping the whole countryside, a fantastic mass of turrets and battlements and towers. It is incredibly old. The stone circuit wall was built by William the Conqueror. Sorry, I thought I heard the rabbit. Where are you? Henry III contributed the first complete round tower in 1272. Although George IV rebuilt so much of the castle, there is still beneath it a sinister labyrinth of dungeons, most with their own sinister stories, some with pathetic little scratches made on the walls by prisoners of other days. Little I dreamed then how well I was to come to know the place, and how one day I, too, would be hidden away there, as securely and as secretly as any political prisoner waiting to be relieved of her head. A tall, handsome, courteous man met me on the steps of the front door of Royal Lodge. This was Ainsley, the butler, who was to become one of my fast friends. He is now steward at Buckingham Palace. His beautiful manners alone were enough to take him a very long way. The Duke and Duchess, he told me, had to go to London and would not be back until later. But Her Royal Highness had special permission to sit up for me, so I would go straight up to the nurseries, as Mrs. Knight did not like the princess to be kept up late. Mrs. Knight was called by everyone Alla, probably a childish version of her Christian name, which was Clara. She had been nanny to the Duchess and her brother David as babies. She was a tall, noble-looking woman, born in Herefordshire. She was not, like so many of the royal attendants, a Scotswoman. She was what every good nurse ought to be. Calm and kind, exuding that comfortable air of infallibility and security so necessary to the welfare of the young. There you are. English nursery tradition is dying out now, along with other admirable institutions that have provided some of our finest citizens. The nursery was a world in miniature, a state within a state. The head of the state was the nurse, usually called Nanny or Nana. It was into her kind arms that the latest baby was handed when the monthly nurse departed. It was she who had the entire upbringing and training of him until the cruel years when school came and he was torn from her at 8. She would have a nursemaid to help her and wait on her, and who in turn would be training to be a nanny herself. In the more important households there would be a footman and a housemaid told off to wait on the nurseries as well. The system was open to abuse when the nurse in charge was a tyrant, as sometimes she was. But mostly, these were dedicated women as surely as nuns are. They had a real vocation, and it is impossible to convey to anyone who has not known it the comfort and serenity those old-fashioned nurseries had. They would mostly be upstairs, shut off on the sunny side of the house. A fire usually burned behind a high wire fire guard on which baby clothes would always be airing, and in front of which the latest baby was bathed. There would always be a rocking chair in which Nanny would rock sufferers from bumps or private sorrows back to serenity. She was always there, a shoulder to weep on, a bosom to fall asleep on. She would sit at evening in the rocker, the children around her on the hearthrug, mending or knitting and telling stories of when Mummy was a little girl. For nannies were handed on. When one family grew up, she would go with them and be a nanny to their babies. When a family fell on evil days and all the rest had fled, Nanny often remained, even when no wages could be paid her, one of the family, taking the rough with the smooth, inaugurating in a different and smaller place that atmosphere of comfort and warmth, and the smell of hot flannel and camphorated oil which those of us who remember those other days can never forget. My goodness, she does make it sound beautiful, doesn't she? And I mean, but I'm sure she's telling the truth. And I think that you could really see how deeply these children would feel, because it's like a mother or a grandmother. So this is the person that they're crying on. This is the person who's rocking them to sleep. This is the person who's bathing them. They are sequestered in a part of the house almost. And their whole world revolves around this woman. It's fascinating, really. Anyway. The matron of a small boys' school once told me that on the first nights of school terms, most of her homesick little boys wept, not for Mummy, but for their nanny. See? And actually, I believe Winston Churchill, he experienced this. And, oh, Timothy, stop that. He was terribly devoted to his nanny, his governess, and he remained in touch with her all throughout his life, all throughout her life, and he went into a deep, deep depression when she passed away. She was like his mother. Most of her homesick little boys wept, not for Mummy, but for their nanny. She was much more than a paid servant. She was their childhood. Here and there in England, these devoted women are still to be found, the sweet, sound core of many a home, but they are dying out fast. This was another world shattered by the bombs. Allah awaited me with that mixture of reserve and apprehension felt by all nannies when the governess is introduced. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm mixing up governess with nanny, so there's a big difference. The governess is obviously a teacher, and the nanny is, well, she's just described it. I like to remember that in all my years at 145 Piccadilly, London, and later at Buckingham Palace, Allah and I remained good friends. And if, on her side, the neutrality was sometimes armed to the teeth, I was always very careful not to tread on her toes. You are being bad. Allah had entire charge in those days of the children's out-of-school lives, their health, their baths, their clothes, while I had them from 9 to 6. She had to help her. Stop. Go. Stop that. An under-nurse and a nursemaid. These two girls are there still, Margaret MacDonald and Ruby MacDonald, two sisters, who have become the personal maids and friends of two sisters. Well, isn't Margaret MacDonald Bobo, who ended up being Elizabeth's dresser, I do believe? The night nursery was decorated in pink and fawn, the Duchess's favorite color scheme. A small figure with a mop of curls sat up in bed. She wore a nightie with a design of small pink roses on it. She had tied the cords of her dressing gown to the knobs of the old-fashioned bed, and was busy driving her team. This was my first glimpse of Princess Elizabeth. "This is Miss Crawford," said Allah in her stern way. The little girl said, "How do you do?" She then gave me a long, comprehensive look I had seen once before, and went on, "Why have you no hair?" I pulled off my hat to show her. "I have enough to go on with," I said. "It's an Eton crop." She picked up her reins again. "Do you usually drive in bed?" I asked. "I mostly go once or twice round the park before I go to sleep, you know," she said. "It exercises my horses." She navigated a dangerous and difficult corner and went on. "Are you going to stay with us?" "For a little while, anyway," I replied. "Will you play with us tomorrow? Will you come to the little house with us?" she asked eagerly. Allah had by now unhitched the team and laid her flat. She allowed herself to be tucked away like a small doll. "Good night. See you tomorrow," she said to me. Royal Lodge was originally a shooting box built by George IV. The original part left is a large drawing room, which is called the saloon, and an octagon room and a wine cellar underneath. It has been painted pink because the Queen had spent happy years of her childhood in a pink house, and had kept a great affection for it. Royal Lodge is quite the most up-to-date of the royal establishments. It is plain and simple, and might have been any country gentleman's home. I had dinner alone on a tray in a pleasant sitting room upholstered in chintz. To my horror, a large fire was burning there. After Scotland, the south seemed to be almost unbearably warm and close, and I could hardly breathe. Upstairs, a cheerful housemaid had done some of my unpacking for me. The schoolroom on the second floor looked out over the gardens, and the whole atmosphere of the comfortable, unpretentious pink house was homelike and informal. Some of my apprehension began to disappear. The Duchess came in later that evening, wearing her going-out clothes, having just come down from London, 25 miles away. She had a sort of sheen or brightness about her in those days. She was 31, and her way of speaking was the easy, friendly one of any girl in her own home speaking to another girl who was far from home and might be a little homesick and needed to be put at ease. She wore, as usual, blue, and I still thought her one of the loveliest people I had ever seen. She had a gentle, kindly manner of looking at you. Her eyes were her most outstanding feature, very blue, very sympathetic, and she looked incredibly youthful. The old enchantment I had felt up north still held me. When she said, "I do hope you will be happy here and like us," I replied, "I am sure I shall," and I meant every word of it. Oh, I like this so much already. It's a good foil. It's a great foil to the royals, to Kitty Kelly, because Kitty Kelly is giving us, the hot gossip. She's giving us the dirt. I will say that she has provided a little bit of, we are seeing a little bit of the good sides of people, a little bit in Kitty Kelly. But but The Little Princesses is really showing everyone at their best, at their most endearing. And, well, I think it's nice to remember that there are two sides. There's two sides to everything. Two things can be true at the same time. So, okay, I am so sorry to bombard you with content. My goodness. But anyway, thank you for indulging me. Have the best evening possible, and I will see you soon.